Insecurity is an ugly thing. It makes you hate people that you don't even know. I think this fits the celestial dragons so well because one, have you seen them? But also they isolate themselves within their literal bubble. If there was a word I could associate the celestial dragons with, it would be insecure. So many of their ideals seem like flat out projections of their own insecurities. I mean, look at the real world. Sometimes our thoughts are backed by so much insecurity that they create lies that we end up believing. I think the celestial dragons put themselves on a pedestal to hide from their various dark pasts that they refuse to face and are embarrassed of. They put others down because they are so afraid to be on the other end of the whip. So today we're going to talk about how by analyzing their insecurities, we might get a better understanding of their origins. So if you're new to my channel, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the ParVision. Alright, let's start with the celestial dragons, or rather, their more accurate name, which would be the heavenly dragon folk. That's going to be an important part of this theory. In my major Amatsuki Last Saga theory, I tied how the same kanji for heaven is used for both the celestial dragons and the Amatsuki clan. But I think another important synthesis from that video was the continued trend of what seemed to be civil wars at the time of the Void Century. For example, there was the 1,000-year war between the Long Arm versus Long Leg tribe, and in that video I hypothesized that there might have been a similar situation between the Kozuki and the Amatsuki, and if you haven't seen that video yet, I would recommend it because it does help the logic line being established here, but even without that, there's a few legs for this theory to stand on. So let's start off with a thought that kind of sparked this thinking. What do the celestial dragons seem to detest the most? It's Fishman. From what we have come to understand, they are placed beneath humans as commoners and are instantly thought of as auction items or trash. But hold on, let me walk us through a very interesting detail. See, when Oda named the races, they're pretty on the nose in what they mean. I mean, Kinokobito translates to mushroom people, long arms have long arms, three-eyed tribe has three eyes, giants are giants, and fishmen are men of fish. So then, what about the heavenly dragon folk? Isn't that technically their race or tribe name? So the heavenly part is clearly an extra adjective. I mean, is it? But okay, let's just stick with the dragon folk for right now. Let's think about dragon folk real quick. I mean, let's just say Oda wasn't lying and they are actually descendants of dragons. But then that is an obvious problem. Well, not necessarily a problem, but you understand why that's weird, right? Here, let me give you a hint. What did we learn in Wano? Kaido had the dragon fruit, right? But remind me what class Kaido's fruit was? It was the fish fruit, right? Meaning that in the One Piece verse, dragons can be classified as fish? So wouldn't that kind of mean that the celestial dragons or heavenly dragon folk are actually descendants of Fishman Island? It would explain the proximity of the two locations as well. But let's take a second because that would be really insane, right? Yes, you heard me right. The Celestials possibly having Fishman blood is what I just said. And then I was like, wait, is that even possible? I mean, clearly they are inbred of some sort, but if the blood was diluted enough, we see even in one generation with Kokoro and Chimney, Chimney has Fishman blood, but has no Fishman manifestations, other than that she can swim really well, which might be important a little bit later in other videos. So it's very possible that there could be other examples of this outside of this theory. Why would Oda introduce the possibility of completely normal looking humans with Fishman blood if we weren't going to see it again in either an important character or possibly an important group of characters? I mean, I had a softer theory that the Kozuki was possibly part Fishman as well, but I'll reel it back in for right now. Just ignore that last sentence. But okay, it's established that yeah, with even one generation of lineage separation, you could appear to be a full human but still have Fishman blood. So it's not impossible that the celestial dragons could be Fishman, but maybe not all the celestials have to be of the same heritage. But this does kind of allow for there to be a way that more Fishman blood is spread throughout the world than we realize. I mean, if we were to step into the dark for a second, the Fishmen were heavily enslaved by the nasty Celestials, right? I mean, I don't need to read you what happens historically in that situation for you to understand. But stepping out of that for now, all of this is really weird because we've been in the water and we've never seen a dragon before. But what's even weirder is despite that, somehow at the very bottom of the ocean is Fishman Island. And what is the kingdom called? It's Ryugu Kingdom. What's that palace called? Ryugu Palace. And what does Ryugu mean? It means Imperial Dragon. So it's Imperial Dragon Kingdom with Imperial Dragon Palace with, oh yeah, an Imperial Dragon statue as a cherry on top. So that means we have Imperial Dragons and Celestial Dragons separated by water and the sky and the red line. Maybe by climbing the red line is how Imperial Dragons become Celestial Dragons. Another thought that ran through my head was, you remember the Emperor Cloud that had the white sea? I was thinking, couldn't the clouds be an oasis for fishmen? If they could have an aquatic fish native to the clouds, why not fishmen? What if the fishmen from the clouds were called dragons instead of fish, or heavenly dragon folk? But so anyways, for the moment, dragon folk, okay? Do we know of any dragons in the series? Well, there was the one that Ryuma slayed, but I doubt that was the Celestial Dragon's ancestor, right? It could be, maybe. Outside of the ones Vegapunk made, we do have Kaido, I guess. I think Kaido's dragon fruit is the most dragon-like thing we'll ever get. It's a mythical dragon, and if Luffy's the sun god Nika, then maybe Kaido's dragon was a god to the Celestial Dragons. Maybe that's the real reason why Kaido's fruit was sought after by Vegapunk and the Celestials. It wasn't for the dragon part necessarily, but rather the lineage factor of the original dragon. And in volume 99's SBS, Oda states that mythical Zoan types exist because they were extracted from already existing organisms. But how would this epic dragon create these atrocities in potato sacks? Which, speaking of potato sacks, maybe this is another huge clue as to why they wear those things in the first place. It's interesting, right? Because the Gorosei never seemed to wear it, and given how someone like Doflamingo was, it's not like the air was actually different from our understanding. But what if the tradition of those suits were created to prevent people from seeing their bodies? Maybe it was also a self-defense from getting wet. All of this does kind of remind me of that Vanderdecken situation, where as a fishman, he had to have an air bubble around him while underwater. Maybe the Celestial Dragon suits were just an upgraded version of that. Another small clue is the family lineage thing. We all know that the Celestial Dragons are ugly, but something else that's striking is that, you know how in Fishman and mink lineage, you could be one animal, but your parents could be a completely different animal. So, for example, if I was a rabbit mink, cause you know reasons, my parents could be a bear mink and a kangaroo mink, and that's the same thing with Fishman as well. You end up getting the features of someone of your family lineage, but not necessarily your immediate family members. When we look at the small examples of the ugly Celestial Dragons, they also have very little familial correlation. I mean, Doflamingo and Rosinante look nothing like their parents. But Roswald, Charlos, and Shalria, they aren't even close, but they're all family. Going back to the Doflamingo family, we have such a wide difference. I mean, not all families in One Piece look exactly like a nuclear lineage, but a lot of times we have seen familial resemblance like Roger and Ace, Garp and Luffy, Momo and Odin. That has been a notable thing as well. So I just wanted you to think about that when it comes to Celestial Dragons. But as you all know, I have a few videos really dissecting random outlying details within Fishman Island arc, which led me to the Vanderdecken mushroom theory, or Godfather Shank's magical warpole theory, or my favorite, Thug Life Otahime, which we'll get into a second. But something else that really interested me was Celestial Dragon Don Quixote Mosgard. If you remember the story, he chartered his own ship to Fishman Island, and on the way to Fishman Island, his ship was attacked by sea monsters, and everyone on his ship was wiped out and killed besides him. He managed to survive in the depths of the ocean alone, and on his shipwrecked ship. While sure, Celestial Dragons could be within some kind of safe chamber on the ship, this was an interesting thing that despite pirates not being able to survive such an event, he did. I wonder if that was a subtle hint at some kind of affinity for water at the minimum. I thought Celestial Dragons were fodder, but they seem to be pretty durable like Fishman. And remember how I mentioned Chimney, despite not being full or even physically apparent Fishman, she is still a notably great swimmer? I was thinking about that situation in Fishman Island with the Celestial Dragon. It's kind of interesting that Mosgard was the only survivor amongst all of his guards. The ship was attacked by sea kings outside of the bubble, so how did Mosgard actually survive? Is it possible that his dormant Fishman DNA aided him in his survival? But yeah, let's back it up real quick. Fishman Island is called the Ryugu Kingdom despite having no history of dragons or present dragons. But even more than that, if dragons are considered fish, even though it's a mythical class, that does imply that there would be Fishman dragons or dragon fishmen, as there are all types of fish as fishmen and mermaids, but there are no dragon fishmen. And that's kind of interesting because another notable ability is that Jinbei, for example, is a whale shark fishman and can speak to whale sharks, and King Neptune can speak to whales, and we know Poseidon can speak to, sea kings. But that would also mean that if there were dragons and dragon fishmen, they could speak to dragons. That's a very important detail, right? Being able to speak to dragons? Doesn't that sound like Game of Thrones or some One Piece filler that you might have skipped if you were a manga reader or you skipped the fillers? Hint hint at a future video. But here we go again, another very interesting situation with an entire kingdom and a missing clan or race. In Wano's case, it was the Amatsuki clan that apparently existed in the Void Century, but are rare to non-existent in the present Wano situation. Similarly, it's literally the Imperial Dragon Kingdom, and there are literally 0 dragons present of fish or man type. So maybe the heavenly dragon folk were actually dragon folk, and so Ryugu Kingdom was originally theirs, and when the world government formed, they left their kingdom. I know it sounds crazy, but even when you look at Fishman Island, their island model kind of just resembles that of a celestial dragon. Like, why is the Imperial Dragon Palace literally in the heavens compared to the kingdom? Way above to give them the sense of superiority. It's kind of ironic that Otahime wanted to be more connected with her kingdom, yet literally lived in an out of reach place, one that you can't help feel disconnected to. I know if I was a kid playing in my neighborhood and I had a floating castle above my house, I 100% would just assume those people would think they're better than me, So then if the Imperial Dragon folk ascended to the Holy Land, which would just be straight up, I could easily see them starting to call themselves the Heavenly Dragon folk. Which also, now that I kind of think about it, wouldn't Fishman be fairly safe to counter the Lunarians which were originally there? Maybe Fisher Tiger parallels the original raid of the Holy Land. Fisher Tiger solo raided Merijois to free the Holy Land. Maybe the Imperial Dragon folk raided the Lunarians and made it the Celestial Dragon's land. But real quick, staying on the Fishman lineage topic just a little longer, it can make a lot of sense that they had Fishman lineage as a possible interpretation of their behavior, is that they themselves have Fishman blood that they are trying to mask with this superiority illusion that they're trying to maintain. And to make sure that they hide it appropriately, that's why they have suits that they wear. Because as we learned from Kokoro, if they get wet, they could possibly manifest their Fishman lineage randomly. But that's specifically mermaids, which brings me to another interesting point. See, what we learned of is that hatred is a cycle. The hatred you unleash on another will eventually cycle back to you unless suppressed with genocidal techniques. That is the truth of the world, and even the fear that our world runs from. That being said, you know what I also noticed? Fishman lineage has an innate division with a very interesting detail. Den, Tom's little brother in chapter 616, proclaimed that fishmen do not discriminate like humans do. But what if they do, or they did? A huge detail was that essentially giving birth to a child as a fishman or merman is RNG, or random number generated essentially. If any of my ancestors were mermaids, then there is a possibility that even with both parents being fishmen, their child could be a mermaid or merman. That being said, we had a full Punnett square of an example in the royal family. Did you notice that the entire royal family was mermaids? The king, the queen, and all 4 children. Is that a coincidence? I mean, if it's simply that Otahime, being the royal here, has a heavily weighted lineage of mermaids, that would heavily sway the results. But for every kid to be a mermaid or merman is kind of suspect to me. It sounds like the exact kind of situation that would have came out of discrimination towards fishmen specifically, either pro-fishmen or against fishmen. Like there was some kind of separation between mermaids and fishmen that existed during the establishment of the current royal family that led to a mermaid-preferred lineage as opposed to a fishman one. I wonder why. Another interesting detail was the ability to speak to fish is markedly notable in mermaids, not fishmen. That gives them a heavy power discrepancy, almost as if fishmen were hybrids of mermaids and humans, and that's how fishman lineage first came to be. Who knows what kind of history these poneglyphs have in store for us? Another thing that is notable was that the ones pushing through the adversity were typically the Fishman. I wonder if that's the original tale being told here, that the heavenly dragon folk or dragon folk were tired of being discriminated against, similar to all the other races at the Civil War during the Void Century. See, and what do I mean by that? See, going back to the innate power in merfolk, isn't that kind of unfair? I mean, a literal ancient weapon lies in that lineage, which fits the idea that dragonfish folk were the ones on the world government side. Similar to how the Kozuki had Pluton and the Amatsuki, I mean the Heaven Moon clan, joined the Heavenly Dragon folks. Which, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch my Amatsuki catfish video. Which, now that I think about it, that clickbait was really foreshadowing this, wasn't it? You won't get that joke in full context just yet, but I promise there's more to this theory that I'll go into in at least 2 future videos. And maybe one of them might not even be on my channel. But while thinking about all of this, there's 2 things that I realized. I was thinking that maybe Shirahoshi is Poseidon simply because she is the exact same species of fish that the original Poseidon was, which might indicate something special about that fish or the Sea Kings. And that's also hints for a future video. The other thing that I was thinking, well, if the celestial dragons were actually dragon fishmen, then maybe that explains Imu's silhouette. This is the most curious shaped body we have ever seen in the entire story. A literal shot in the dark is that, well, if we look at Oda's concept art for Kaido's hybrid dragon form that I think most people liked over what we actually got, it kind of would really fit the silhouette. It looks like what dragon folk would actually kind of look like, and maybe that's actually why Oda chose not to go with this dope looking form. So maybe the endgame villain is another Fishman. You know how so many people think Imu has the Umi Umi no Mi? Maybe that isn't necessary because as a dragon fishman, maybe their ability to control water is the most intense we have ever seen. That could connect back to my Nolan video, for example, with a knock-up stream. I mean, that also goes back to my original idea. I forget which video it was where I was thinking Vars was Imu and that Vars looked kind of like Jinbei, and I think that has resurfaced now as being what Imu looks like, a dragon fishman. Which, now that I think about it, also connects to my Rock's original race theory video too. There's so many connections. I know this theory sounds crazy, but it's actually so much deeper than you might think. I think we are going to find out more and more about the origins of humans and living creatures on the One Piece planet and how everything was sourced originally from nature. A battle of elements creating a major storm that will end up being the last saga that will determine whether people can live in harmony together. I think the overall sentiment echoed from the beginning that makes this idea make a lot of sense to me is the intense discrimination towards fishmen, when the irony would be the discrimination would be enforced to create a manufactured separation when there should be no separation at all. If you enjoyed this theory, make sure to buckle in for more. And if you're new to my channel, definitely check out the rest of my videos because all of my theories connect one way or another. It's a lot of fun to write the scripts like I'm going from island to island with my theories, where they are so different but all connected. If you end up video hopping on my channel, make sure to leave comments so I can see the log of your journey. And before you go, make sure to leave a like, share the theory, and subscribe. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next ParVision.